Dear students, today I am going to discuss the second part of the poem Mending Wall by Robert Frost. In the first two sessions, we discussed the first part of the poem. The first part consists of 27 lines, and those 27 lines have already been discussed. In the first part, the poet speaks about the mending of a wall, the repairing of a wall which lies in between the orchards of two neighbors. He says that there is something in nature that doesn't love a wall, and the speaker in the poem does not believe in the idea of a wall, and he tries to convince his neighbor by saying that it is not imperative for them to have a wall in between their properties. But the neighbor says, good fences make good neighbors. He does not want to go beyond the age-old saying. He does not want to go beyond the wise saying of his ancestors, of his forefathers. Now we move on to the second part of the poem. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors, isn't it? Where there are cows. But here there are no cows. Here I am going to discuss the first four lines in the second part of the poem. The first expression in the second part, spring is the mischief in me. We all know spring is a season of innumerable activities. It is a season in which the countrysides are brimming with energy, vitality, and excitement, whereas winter is often considered as a passive season. People stay indoors. Now the people come out of their hibernation. They come out of their houses and start enjoying spring. Here the speaker uses that expression, spring is the mischief in me. That means he is a little bit mischievous. He tries to put a notion in the head of his neighbor. He tries to put that idea in the head of his neighbor. He tries to convince his neighbor that a wall is not important. He says a wall is essential if the neighbors have cows, but here they do not have cows, and it is not an essential thing. It is not very important to have a wall in between their orchards. If there are cows, probably these cows will trespass and eat the corns of his neighbor. In that situation, the neighbors need a wall. Otherwise, that situation may lead to conflict. Now we move on to the next few lines in the second part of the poem. Before I built a wall, I would ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down, I could say else to him, but it is not else exactly, and I would rather he said it for himself. So here the speaker says, before I built a wall, I would like to know what I was walling in or walling out. What was being protected and what was being brought together. What would I like to protect and what would I like to keep away from my property. So there should be a purpose for anything that we do. Before we doing something, we should know the purpose. There should be a specific, a definite purpose for doing anything. But here there is no purpose. The writer speaks about the futility of many of our daily activities that gets highlighted in these lines. Before I built a wall, I would like to know to whom I would give offense. So when you build a wall, you offend your neighbor. because there is that element of mistrust, there is that element of doubt, there is that element of suspicion. Just think about a situation. You and your friend come to your house, you close the door on your friend, get into your room, and you go through your wallet box, count the money. Your friend is standing outside. When you close the door on him, he may feel offended because there is that element of suspicion, there is that element of doubt. So when you construct a wall, when you build a wall, there is that element of doubt. You doubt your neighbor, you do not have any trust in him. Then a figure of speech is used here. The figure of speech is pun. How the word offense is used by the poet. Clever use of offense sounds like fence. So it is a humorous play of words. The boulders are knocked over. That may be the work of elves, but the speaker knows that it is not the work of elves. And he likes his neighbor to find out what the reason behind the destruction of the wall is. He wishes his neighbor to find out that. We move on to the next few lines in that part. He said it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand like an old stone savage armed. He moves in darkness as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well, he says again, good fences make good neighbors. The speaker finds his neighbor grasping, holding a stone, a huge stone in his arms like an old stone savage armed. The speaker considers his neighbor as a savage, an uncivilized person, a Stone Age man, a man who belonged to the Paleolithic age, a man who was equipped with that weapon called stone, a man who belonged to the Paleolithic age, an unrefined person, an uncivilized person. So here the speaker says that his neighbor is uncivilized because he does not want to revisit that age-old saying. He does not want to revisit that wise saying, good fences make good neighbors. He does not want to revisit the traditions. And he is compared to a Stone Age savage. He is compared to a man who belongs to the Paleolithic age. The neighbor moves in darkness. He moves in darkness. That darkness is not created by, is not formed by the shade of the trees or the woods, shade of the trees or the forest. It is something else. Darkness has a symbolic significance. It stands as a symbol of ignorance. It stands as a symbol of ignorance. A man who moves in ignorance, a man who is ignorant, a man who can be considered as a diehard, who is against all sorts of reforms, a man who is against all sorts of changes, all sorts of reforms, all sorts of progressive ideas. The neighbor is compared to a Stone Age savage. Here the poet uses a beautiful figure of speech. The figure of speech used here is simile. He is compared to a Stone Age savage who moves in darkness, who holds a huge stone in his hands like a Stone Age savage equipped with his weapon. However hard the speaker tries, the neighbor sticks on with his stand. He says, good fences make good neighbors. He does not want to go beyond the words of his ancestors. He does not want to go beyond the words of his forefathers. He does not want to go beyond the words of his father. He says, good fences make good neighbors. Some sort of restriction is very essential in all sorts of relationships, and these restrictions make the relationships harmonious, make the relationships peaceful. The entire poem revolves around that simple idea of mending a wall, the simple idea of repairing a wall. It is a simple rural experience. It's a very simple, delightful, rustic experience. But when you go deep down, you find that the poem has profound meaning. The poem has different layers of meaning. Many interpretations are possible for this particular poem. And as Robert Frost himself says, a poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom. So, in the next session, we will discuss the various layers of meanings that this poem has, the various interpretations which are possible for this particular poem. That's all for the day. Thank you.